What's up, guys? Neil Orfield here, and I'm going to show you how I will be setting up my fantasy cruncher for the Thanksgiving Thursday night football slate between the Vikings and the Patriots. I'll be setting up for the largest field GPP on FanDuel. While you're coming in, please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. You can also turn on notifications if you want to get alerts when our shows go live. All right, first thing first, I am going to change around my columns here. I have a quick view saved. So I have the columns that I'm most interested in the middle of my screen, those being ownership projections, my projection, exposure caps, and the amount that I'm getting to each player after I have run a crunch. I am going to, this is a new step as of this week. I'm going to remove some players from my player pool. So I'm in the all tab. I'm going to sort by my projection and just remove every player who does not have a projection from the pool for the purpose of in groups. That this will remove players from groups and save us some time. So thank you to Peter Viles, aka Ahabro, for this trick, and then also thank you to Brad Jenkins, aka Brad is Pro, for showing me that I don't have to do these one by one. I can just put my mouse there and just move it down the column, and it will. I can much more quickly get rid of all these players with zero projections. If you have any tips or tricks like this, you can see I don't know everything. So happy to learn if you have some more efficient ways of doing some of the things that I'm trying to do. If I can save a little bit of time in these videos and in my process, that would be great. So if you have any tips and tricks for me, feel free to comment in the video. Okay. Okay, I've removed every player with a zero projection. Next, I'm going to go to the MVP tab up here, and I'm going to set an exposure cap of 20% for players in the MVP spot. So I'm not going to get more than 20% of any player at MVP. I think that is a good number for this slate. It changes slate to slate how high you want to set this number, especially on FanDuel. There might be slates where there's only a few viable options in the MVP spot because you really need it to be the highest scoring player. I think there have been slates where I've played 100% Lamar Jackson because it was so clear that he was going to be the highest scoring player on the slate on FanDuel, and there's no multiplier, no salary multiplier. So you can just play whoever is the best play in the MVP spot on FanDuel. All right. Next, I'm going to go into the advanced options tab. And I'll be working in the general tab and the groups tab, starting here in the general tab. Unique players per lineup. I think in a 150 set, one unique player per lineup makes sense. If you're making fewer than 40 lineups, I would say I would change this to 2 unique players per lineup just for the purpose of diversifying your lineup set. Team salary, I don't set a minimum. I do set a maximum just for the purpose of avoiding the most duplicated lineups. If I am lucky enough to win, if my lineup puts a big enough score to get first place, I don't want to be splitting with 1,000 people. I want to be splitting with preferably 0 people, but generally the goal is 10 or fewer people is kind of my goal in terms of duplicates. And the best way to avoid the most duplicated lineups, at least, is to leave a little bit of salary on the table. You'll still run into some lineups occasionally where you're going to be duplicated a good amount, but for the most part, this does the trick. So I'm going to leave 1,500 on the table here just to avoid some of the most duplicated lineups. So instead of using the entire $60,000 salary cap, the lineups I'm making here are going to use 58,500 or less. This is something I do for Showdown in particular. I don't do this on main slates. You don't really need to worry as much about duplicated lineups on main slates. Offensive players versus defense. Default set to 2 players. I'm going to change this to max 4 players. So I can have 4 players from one team against the defense of the other team. As we just saw a couple weeks ago with the Browns having 4 players in the lineup against the Bengals defense being the only representative from the Bengals. Can happen. So I like to allow for that in my lineup sets. Exposure cap, I already set the 20% cap on the MVP spot. I'm going to leave it at 100% for the flex. Randomness, I'm going to set to 50%. If you want a little bit more control over your lineups, you might want to set this a little bit lower, maybe as low as even 10% if you want complete control. Not complete control, but close enough to it if you do 10%, and that still will be speeds up the program a little bit to have some randomness on. Also, if you're using classic randomness, I might recommend 30 or 40% instead of 50%. Not that 50% is bad. It's just a little bit more random with classic randomness than normal distribution, where still I'm going to be closer to the mean projections in general. Minimum projection included in calculation, the default is set to 3. I'm going to leave that at 3. If there is a player who projects for fewer than 3 fantasy points who I want to be in my player pool, I'm just going to boost their projection to make sure that it is above 3 fantasy points. And then players from each team max, I'm going to leave this at 4 so I can have 4 players from one team against just 1 from the opposing team. All right, now I'm going to go into groups. First group I'm going to make is a Kirk Cousins MVP group. So I'm finding Kirk Cousins in the MVP spot, make him my key player. I'm going to sort by position now and add every Vikings pass catcher to the secondary group, starting with Thielen, Osborne, Jefferson, Rager, Munt, Hawk, Ham. I don't know that I'm going to include. I think I'm just not going to include the running backs here. Dalvin Cook, I think, has been targeted 29 times so far this year or something. So fewer than 3 times per game. You could include him here. I think that I'm going to end up with enough Dalvin Cook probably in my lineups anyway that I don't need to be putting him in this group. I don't think that I would like a group that has Cousins in the MVP spot and Dalvin Cook as the only pass catching option. I think that's a little bit thin because Cook just doesn't score a lot of touchdowns through the air. You could include Cook or Madison here, or even CJ Ham if you wanted to. I think I did include Ham. I'm going to remove him. I think in general, though, I'm going to say require at least one wide receiver or tight end in my lineups that have Kirk Cousins at MVP. The real decision point here being, do I want to change this to require at least 2 of these players? And I don't think I'm going to do that. Again, that's something I might consider if I were making fewer than 40 lineups. I might just say, if I have Cousins in the MVP spot, I want to have at least 2 Vikings pass catchers in the flex. But I think in a 150 set, it's okay to leave this at 1. And then I'm going to make it more likely that I get to multiple Vikings pass catchers because I am going to give boosts to all of these players' projections in lineups that have Kirk Cousins at MVP. I will say with Justin Jefferson, so he's at 14.99 projection. We've got, where is he? Dalvin Cook at 14.37. Dalvin Cook is 1,600. Jefferson 16.5. I might be really limiting myself by giving this big projection boost to Justin Jefferson. It's going to be tough to fit Kirk Cousins with both Jefferson and Dalvin Cook, particularly leaving some salary on the table. So maybe I want to give Jefferson a little bit lower of a boost just to have the possibility of having some lineups that have Cousins at MVP and then throw Dalvin Cook in there with one of these receivers instead of Jefferson. It could happen anyway, just because I am not going to get the same lineups over and over. So, but I think I'm going to give a little bit of a lower boost to Justin Jefferson because he already projects so well, and I don't want him in every Kirk Cousins MVP lineup. All right. Now I'm going to do the same thing with Mac Jones. Going to find Mac Jones in the MVP spot, make him my MVP, make him my key player, and then add all of these Patriots pass catchers to a secondary group. I think I am going to include Damian Harris along with Ramondre Stevenson. Stevenson's a no-brainer, very involved in the passing game. Harris, you don't necessarily need to include here, but I think I'm going to. It's debatable. He's actually very similar to the Vikings running back. Maybe I'll just exclude Damian Harris. All right. So now I'm going to say, if I have Mac Jones in the MVP spot, I'm going to leave this at least 1 player from this group. Again, if you're playing 40 or fewer lineups, I would probably change this to 2 players. Mac Jones, like Kirk Cousins, doesn't have a lot of rushing upside. So generally, most of the time, if he is the optimal MVP, he's going to be bringing along multiple pass catchers from his team in the flex spot. But I'm going to allow in a 150 set for just one pass catcher from this group. But I'm also going to, again, give some boosts to make it more likely I get multiple. I gave a slightly lower boost to Ramondre Stevenson just because he already projects so well point per dollar, and just his raw projection is the highest of this group by far. So maybe a 12% boost, I would just end up with too much Ramondre Stevenson, too many lineups with just Mac Jones at MVP and then Ramondre Stevenson. So now I'm going to make it a little bit less likely by giving him a smaller boost here. All right, I think that looks good. Now, two more groups I'm going to make. I'm going to make a Cousins flex group and a Jones flex group. All I'm doing with these groups, I'm going to say, if I have Kirk Cousins in the flex, I'm going to make Kirk Cousins in the flex my key player. I just want to make sure that I have at least one Vikings pass catcher somewhere in the lineup along with him. Again, debatable if you want to include the running backs. I think it's a little bit more viable. I think I'm going to include the running backs in the flex. It is half PPR on FanDuel, so Kirk Cousins is a little bit more likely to get there without bringing along his primary pass catchers. So I think that it's a little bit more viable to include, if he's in the flex spot, to have him just with Dalvin Cook. There are enough outs there. It's again debatable whether you should be including the running backs in this group. I'm a little bit hesitant because I don't want to end up with a ton of lineups that have Kirk Cousins in the flex with just Dalvin Cook, because it's a little bit thin. I want to allow it, but also not get to a ton of it. I'll see if I get to too many of them. I'm going to allow it for now. And I'm going to make the same group with Mac Jones in the flex. So I made Mac Jones in the flex by key player. Now just adding all of these Patriots pass catchers. To a secondary group. All right, I'm going to see what these lineups look like. So I'm going to crunch out 150 lineups using my projections, which are the Stokastic projections. First lineup looks great. I don't know why I'm getting this. First lineup looks great. We've got Kirk Cousins at MVP with multiple pass catchers. Then we've got Mac Jones with Nelson Aguilar. Everything looks very well correlated there. Second lineup, Mac Jones with multiple pass catchers. Kirk Cousins with Justin Jefferson looks great. Like both of those. Third lineup, we've got Mac Jones with both Hunter Henry and Ramondre Stevenson. Kirk Cousins with Osborne. Looks good. Now, here's the first one that I look at that I'm like, that doesn't correlate all that well. I know I intentionally allowed for it, but Kirk Cousins with just Dalvin Cook. I think it's viable because I think, Dalvin Cook could score a receiving touchdown, get Kirk Cousins there. And Kirk Cousins, can spread the ball around a bit more. We don't have to worry. It's only half PPR, so we don't get the full PPR to every receiver on every passing down. So it's a little bit more likely for Kirk Cousins to be in the flex with no pass catchers or, relatively thin pass catchers like Dalvin Cook on FanDuel as opposed to DraftKings. So I think that this is viable, although, I don't want to see a ton of it. And then we see again Mac Jones with multiple pass catchers. Looks good. Cousins with KJ Osborne. Jones with Jacoby. Now we've got no quarterbacks in this one. I think that is fine. Cousins with multiple. Jones with Henry. Looks good. Jones with just Jacoby Myers. So this is another one. I'd prefer to see multiple Patriots pass catchers in lineups with Mac Jones at MVP, just because on every passing play where Mac Jones throws to Jacoby Myers is outscoring Mac Jones, and Mac Jones doesn't really have a lot of rushing upside, so he's going to have to be scoring a good number of fantasy points on throws that are not to Jacoby Myers as well to be able to outscore Jacoby Myers and put up enough fantasy points to be the MVP. So it's a little bit thin, but I do think that it is possible. And of course, he has the ability to, he could still score a touchdown. He's not much of a rusher. He could score a touchdown from the goal line. There are ways for this to work out. It's just a little bit thin, so not something I want to see a ton. But in a 150 set, I'd be okay with seeing a few of these in a set of 20 or fewer lineups. Probably would require multiple Patriots pass catchers if I have Jones at MVP. Cousins, Jefferson, no Mac Jones to worry about there. Jones with 2. Here's another Kirk Cousins with just Dalvin Cook. How many of those am I going to end up with? Let's see. Let's look at those lineups specifically. Kirk Cousins. Good. So there's one with just Dalvin Cook. Good. Another one with just Dalvin Cook. So we're at 2 already. That one's good. Thielen, Hawkinson. 3 now, 4 now. Okay, we're running to a lot of Kirk Cousins with just Dalvin Cook. So there are 2 things that I would consider doing now. I say that now, I'm not running into any more. Here's another one. All right, so 2 things that I would consider doing now. I could either just go in groups and remove Dalvin Cook from this group, or I could just say, still going to allow it, give a little bit of a negative boost to Dalvin Cook so I don't run into so many of those lineups. Maybe that's what I'll do. Okay, I think that works. Make those a little bit less likely. But in general, I would say these lineups on an individual level, they all correlate well enough that I think that they have a chance to win, even if we do have, these ones obviously a little bit thin, where it's Kirk Cousins with no pass catchers outside of Dalvin Cook. But I do think that they're at least plausible. You can see a world in which that works out, where Cousins throws a 20-yard touchdown to Dalvin Cook. It certainly could happen. So I think that those are at least plausible. All right. In general, I think these look okay. Here's another one. Kirk Cousins at MVP with just Justin Jefferson in the flex. Don't want to see a ton of it because generally we need Kirk Cousins, if he's in the MVP spot, to be the optimal MVP. He is throwing the ball around to multiple receivers, but I think that there are ways in which he does have a couple rushing touchdowns already this year, certainly in his bag of tricks. So if I see that in a handful of lineups in a 150 set, I'm okay with it. All right, other than correlations, maybe I'll run one more crunch real quick since I have given that negative boost to Dalvin Cook. All right, and then the second thing I'm going to do, so I checked my correlations. Now I'm also going to look at these tabs up here. So I'm just going to look at each position, quarterback, how much am I getting and how much do I want to get? Looks like I'm getting a good amount of these quarterbacks. I think I'm happy with that. Running backs, I'm going to sort by salary here. I'm getting to 10% Dalvin Cook, 26% Ramondre Stevenson, 0 Damian Harris, 7% Alexander Madison, 0 CJ Ham. All right, one thing that I noticed right away, Damian Harris only coming in at 8.2% projected ownership. That is pretty low. I think I'd like to get above that number. I know, just looking at the way these other guys project, I'm going to have to give Damian Harris a pretty good projection to be able to get him in some lineups at this 11,500 price tag. I'm not going to get him up to 14 fantasy points because then I'm going to, he's going to have the same fantasy points projection as Ramondre Stevenson at 3,000 cheaper. I'm just going to get to a ton of Damian Harris if I went up that high. But if I went up to, say, 11 fantasy points, maybe I'd get to a more reasonable amount of Damian Harris. Dalvin Cook, maybe I want a little bit more, give him a projections boost. And I should note here, I'm not actually making these decisions right now. I'm trying to show you my general thought process. You can, make your own decisions on these, on the player to player level. It's best if, we all make slightly different decisions, but we just want to make sure that we are correlating our lineups and then getting to exposure levels that we like. I'm just trying to give you an example of how I make adjustments, looking at the projections and the projected ownership, and looking at the players around them to see how much I need to boost projections. Justin Jefferson, not getting to a ton. Probably want more than 11% Justin Jefferson. I'll give him a little boost. Devontae Parker getting to 0 currently. He's only projected for 3.7% ownership. I kind of love that. If we're expecting Devontae Parker at full health, which is undecided at this point, at 3.7% ownership, I'd love to get over that number, even if the price tag is a little bit too high for him. That's the reason we're getting him at low ownership. And really, still, just one touchdown probably pays off that price tag. So these are the kinds of players that have a real shot and don't get a ton of ownership. Those are the players that I really like to target in some lineups on FanDuel. Again, not making the decision of who that player is going to be, but Devontae Parker looks like a pretty good candidate to be one of those players here. Tyquan Thornton, same thing. If he's going to come at 2.2% projected ownership, it's not going to take much to pay off that price tag. Maybe I'll try and get some Tyquan Thornton. KJ Osborne already getting to a good amount. Of course, I've made adjustments to these guys. I'm probably going to get to less KJ Osborne now. Maybe I don't want to get to too much less, so I'll give him a little projection boost as well. Kendrick Bourne, another player who could, of course, pay off his price tag with just a single touchdown, and he's only 2% owned. I'm going to want to get to a little bit of Kendrick Bourne probably. Nelson Aguilar already getting to a good amount. Jalen Reagor, don't know that I need him in my player pool, so I'm not going to change his projection at all. I also did not change my CJ Ham projection. So currently, both Reagor and Ham are not included in my player pool because they project for fewer than 3 fantasy points. Maybe I'll give Ham just a 3 fantasy point projection, see if he comes up at all, because that 5,000 price tag probably would just take 1 touchdown for CJ Ham potentially to be optimal. So I'm going to include him in my player set potentially. Tight ends, TJ Hawkinson only getting to 16% below the field. I'm pretty high on Hawkinson. I think I'd like to give him a little bit of a projection boost. Maybe bring him up to 11. So he is, I can see here, he is 12,000. Damian Harris is 11,500. I brought Damian Harris up to 11. So now I'm going to get to more Damian Harris than I was of TJ Hawkinson, most likely. All right, I'm going to give them the same projection. If I give them the same projection, I'll get to more Harris than Hawkinson. Maybe I'll give a little bit more to see what happens. Getting to a lot of Hunter Henry. I'm going to leave the projection here. The amount that I get is probably going to come down just because I've changed other players' projections positively. So relative to those players, Hunter Henry's projection is lowered. Jonnu Smith already getting to 21%. Going to leave that. Johnny Munt, don't know that I want any Johnny Munt. Maybe I'll give him a projection of 3. Probably end up with more CJ Ham because they now have the same projection and Ham is cheaper. Although I did give a boost to Johnny Munt in some Kirk Cousins lineup, so we'll see how it plays out. Nick Folk, only getting 6%. Maybe give him a little bit of a projection boost. Going to leave Greg Joseph where he is. Getting to a lot of the Vikings defense, not a whole lot of the Patriots defense. I'm going to give the Patriots defense a little bit of a projection boost and then crunch again. And it's just, this is my entire process. It's all trial and error. I keep getting this message. Normally I would go try logging in again to make sure I don't get this, but I am in the middle of a video, so I'm just going to deal with that nuisance. All right, 37% Vikings, 9% Patriots. Still getting to no Nick Folk. I gave him a projection. His projection is still lower than Greg Joseph's, even though he's more expensive. So maybe I need to bring him up a little bit more. I get some Nick Folk. Now I'm getting to 8% Johnny Munt. I don't know if I want 8%, but I'll leave it there for now. Only getting to 5% Jonnu Smith now. That came down a good amount. Maybe I want more than that. Give him a little boost. Now get into just 5% Nelson Aguilar. Now I'm getting to 17% Kendrick Bourne. Honestly, I don't hate that. Sometimes I do end up with 17, 18% of players who were 2% owned, just because, as I said, those players on FanDuel in particular, even more so than DraftKings, players who have a real shot at seeing some playing time, potentially scoring a touchdown, get overlooked because you look at the price tag and it's like, well, that's clearly the price tag is too high for the role in the offense. But there is so much variance in football games in particular that that guy, he'll have opportunities to score a touchdown. And if he does on FanDuel more so than DraftKings, it just takes one big play to be optimal because on DraftKings, you have to account for the PPR nature of DraftKings, where it's harder for a player who only, is going to see one or two targets. It's harder for those players to be optimal because they're competing with guys who maybe have 6 or 7 catches. And even if those guys don't score a touchdown, they're getting 6 or 7 points out of those receptions. Whereas on FanDuel, you're only getting a half point PPR. It's a little bit easier for guys who just have a shot at a touchdown at some point to keep up with the guys who are seeing higher volume. So I like to target some of these very low owned players who I think have a shot at scoring some points. Now I see Jacoby Myers. I'm down to just 6% Jacoby Myers. I probably want more than that. Give him a boost. I'm not going to go through this process. I sometimes crunch 20, 30 times on these, so I'm not going to go through all of those right now. Just kind of trying to show you again my general process. Alexander Madison now, because I raised all those other projections, I now get 0 Alexander Madison. Maybe I don't want that. Maybe I want a little bit of Alexander Madison. He's another player, actually. He's a good example. He's coming in at under 5% ownership. He's only 7,500. We wouldn't be shocked at all to see Alexander Madison score a touchdown, and he would easily pay off that price tag. So he is a player. He's another one of those players who I'd like to be above the field, maybe even by a good amount, maybe double, maybe even triple the field. Damian Harris, enjoy liking that I see 16, 17% Damian Harris. Just going to give him a little bit of a boost to make sure it stays there. I think I'm going to want more than 5% Dalvin Cook. Give him a little bit of a boost. And now you can see the quarterbacks. Actually, I think Kirk Cousins is around where he had been. Mac Jones came down just a little bit. I'd still be okay with if I get 35% Mac Jones. I'm probably okay with that. I'm going to leave him there for now. Crunch it out again. Okay, so now I'm still getting a good amount of these quarterbacks. 15% Dalvin Cook looks a little bit better than the 5% I was getting. 9% Alexander Madison looks better than 0%. 30% Damian Harris. Maybe I'm going a little bit overboard there, but I wouldn't hate it. Probably want more than 16% Ramondre Stevenson. So maybe I give him a little bit of a boost. Probably don't need 16% CJ Ham, but I'm just going to leave him there for now. If I continue to get 16% CJ Ham with a projection of 3, I would go back into my advanced options and I would lower my minimum projection included in calculation to 2 fantasy points, and then I would lower CJ Ham's projection just a little bit to get a little bit less. But usually as I'm adjusting other players, I'll just get less naturally until I get to an amount that I want. Wide receivers, 10% Kendrick Bourne looks good. 15% Taekwon looks good. 6.7% Devontae Parker. Maybe I want a little bit more than that even. Already taking a stand. I'm already nearly double the field, but maybe I'd still want a little bit more potentially. Just 11% Justin Jefferson. Maybe I want more than that. Again, I'm not gonna go through the whole process of doing this 20 times, but just kind of trying to show you my general approach, what I'm looking at as I am adjusting things. And then just same thing, looking position by position. How much am I getting of each player? Do I like what I'm seeing? 5% Adam Thielen. Now maybe I give him a boost to get a little bit more. Of course, then the guys around him come down a little bit. Have to think about how every change in projection affects every other player. You can see I lowered CJ Ham. Now I'm getting a little bit less. Now I'm only getting 6% Alexander Madison. I'd probably give him a little boost. But again, I'm not going to go through all of these positions, do all of my crunches over and over right now until I get to exposures that I want, because that's something I'm going to do before the game. After inactives come out, once I know the entire story of the game, who's in, who's out, I'll have a better idea of how much I want of each player. And of course, I also have not really dug deep into the numbers. I watch every Vikings game, so I have an idea of who I want from the Vikings, but it's still more helpful to look at the actual numbers in making these decisions. So I'll be doing that tomorrow. Not going to go through the whole process right now, just trying to show you my general approach, and hope you can find some success tomorrow night using this or a similar process. Good luck and skol.